In Afghanistan, the Horn of Africa, the Philippines, Operation Enduring Freedom Forces targeted terrorists and their supporters.
Baghdad is under attack, Basra is under attack.
Then, in 2003, U.S. forces took on an additional mission as a U.S.-led multinational force again invaded Iraq. Operation Iraqi Freedom had three objectives: search for weapons of mass destruction, end the reign of Saddam Hussein and his support for terrorism, and free the Iraqi people. Guard and reserve forces had key roles from the start.
When the initial force went to OIF, when that combat operations kicked off in March of 2003, a significant portion of the Marine Corps in 1MEF, who was the fighting force for the Marine Corps in OIF, a significant portion of that was reserves.
About 1.1 million men and women serve in the Guard and Reserve. They're 46% of the total force. Army Guard and Reserve have the largest portion of those numbers, with some 550,000 people. And right now, those forces, along with their active duty Army counterparts, bear the biggest burden in today's operations.
In the combat portion, obviously all services are participating, but in the aftermath of it, the majority of troops are Army in theater, working with the Marines having the rest of the ground force.
Where we are today, for the last 5+ years, the much increased utilization of all reserve forces, whether it be units, detachments, or individuals, is now in kind of a steady state of some level of mobilization.
The global war on terrorism, OIF, OEF, is really testing our ability to sustain a long-term deployment of forces on a regular basis.
And as the number of lives lost grows, while hundreds more are gravely injured, much talk is focused on whether or not U.S. forces can keep up the pace.
We, in fact, have been doing that now for 6 years, and there are those that really thought the Guard would break, and that we've been unable to stand this kind of stress on the force. And you would think that we would not be able to recruit and retain our force under this kind of stress. In fact, the truth is we actually are flourishing.
Now, that wouldn't necessarily be the logical pattern you'd think we'd follow. As much as we're using people, as much deployment as people are doing, we've sent people into the combat operations 3 and 4 times now in the last 5 years, some of them. And they stay with us. I think they stay with us because they like being part of our units and they are doing something important.
We have people on their 4th, 5th deployment already, and we have over 4,000 people right now with their hands up in the air, willing to train for any mission to go serve.
Nearly all the reserve components say 2006 was a good year for both recruitment and retention. Along with better training and equipment, improvements in readiness throughout the reserve components has been a top priority. That means more emphasis is placed on things like making sure families are prepared and that troops are physically fit.
We're mobilizing people to some pretty austere, harsh conditions, whether it's 126 degrees and full body armor in the desert, whether it's the cold of the mountains. You need to be fit when you get there, and we realize this now, and so we hold them to a higher standard.
But on top of supporting military operations around the world, there are still the obligations that must be met on the home front when disasters like 9/11 and 2005's hurricanes happen.
At one point in that Katrina response, the Air National Guard had 50% of all the C-130s in the inventory in the air in response to citizens of our nation. It was extraordinary.
Okay, here, we've got a rescue in progress.
Coast Guard men and women also played a big part in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, ultimately helping save more than 30,000 lives.
The interesting thing about the Coast Guard Reserve and the Coast Guard, if an event occurs, the Coast Guard folks go to their stations to get in touch with their chain of command, and they're ready. And the paperwork might not be done right that minute, but darn it, they're ready to go, and they were ready. It happened in 9/11, happened with Rita, it happened with Katrina.
The training Coast Guard reservists get isn't on simulators or in military exercises. They fulfill their training requirements doing what the Coast Guard does every day.
When our reserves train and get ready for the next event, they train and work together day in and day out with our active duty components doing homeland security, search and rescue. So when they're drilling on a weekend, they are conducting those missions.
In addition to its state role of responding in case of emergency, the National Guard took on a unique new mission last summer. In August, the Guard began the 2-year Operation Jumpstart, an effort to help safeguard the U.S. Southwest border by providing support and improving the capabilities of the Border Patrol.
They have virtually returned hundreds of badges back to the border because the National Guard has enabled them to be freed up to do law enforcement work where heretofore the Border Patrol agents were being used for other than law enforcement. We've expanded their eyes and ears dramatically. We can see parts of the border and report on operations occurring on the border that the Border Patrol, previous to the Guard involvement, was unable to do. We've done a dramatic job of increasing their what they call tactical infrastructure, their vehicle barriers, their road nets, their ability to have mobility of the Border Patrol agents laterally along the border, in placing sensors, putting in fences, lots and lots of capabilities that the Guard has brought to this mission that is much appreciated by U.S. Border Patrol.
Around the world, joint operations between all the military services and utilizing both active and reserve forces is happening more every day. And to meet mission needs, many services are often forming units made up of a mix of active, Guard, and reserve men and women from all over the country.
The reason we can do that like that is because we all have the same standards for training and for operational readiness. So we can put together sort of a rainbow of units to do the same kind of missions with the same airplanes and not miss a beat because we all do the same kind of training, have the same tactics, training, and procedures.
But even though training and equipment are improved over the Cold War years and men and women are continuing their service, reserve component leaders are always looking ahead, thinking of new initiatives and incentives to help keep the force strong in the future.
We walk a tightrope. The tightrope is how do we retain a force that's greatly needed, that's both a citizen and a warrior. If we be too heavy-handed on the warrior side, we're going to lose it. If we're lackadaisical on the citizen side, we're going to lose them as well. So we got to do this balancing act.
Equally critical to maintaining force strength is knowing where to send them, a difficult task.
Because the enemy has a vote. I mean, we have not exactly had a perfect crystal ball in any regard in forecasting how many forces we would need in each one of these rotations for Iraq and Afghanistan. Things have not gone exactly according to our plan. The enemy has its own plan.
Since 9/11, more than 500,000 men and women from our reserve components have deployed. Today, some 90,000 are involved in U.S. military operations around the world. Coming up, an independent commission on the Guard and Reserve says vast improvements are still needed, and future goals and challenges for our citizens in service. Stay with us.